Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Today, just days before the crucial New York primary, a passionate yet well-reasoned debate between supporters of Bernie Sanders and supporters of Hillary Clinton. And later, in our evidence-based politics segment, we'll drill down on fracking. New York has banned the controversial method of extracting natural gas and oil, but the candidates differ on whether it should be banned everywhere. First, though, the Wyoming results, and if you will, the Empire Stakes. Yes, time for the horse race. Last Saturday, Wyoming handed Sanders his 7th victory in 8 state contests. But Clinton could snap that winning streak in New York, where she has consistently led the polls by double digits. Bolstering her possible win would be Hillary's broad-based support among New York's highly diverse population. And the state's strict election rules will also play to her strengths. Up until now, Bernie has benefited heavily from independent voters. However, they will be of no help, as only registered Democrats will be permitted to cast a ballot. But as the delegate numbers continue to pile up for Clinton, national polling averages show Sanders' increasing appeal with voters. Nationally, he has all but closed the gap in Real Clear Politics polling average and is now within a slender single percentage point of Clinton. It was indeed a relatively quiet week, with just Wyoming voting, but despite Bernie's win with the voters there, in that race he and Hillary each notched the same number of delegates, 7, who were up for grabs at those caucuses. However, Bernie did win the majority of the state delegates, who will determine another 4 delegates that get sent to the convention. This underscores just how complicated party rules can be. While it may have been a peaceful week for Republicans, no primaries, no caucuses, under the surface, the battle over convention delegates raged on. And thanks to Ted Cruz's effective ground game, Donald Trump came out a loser over the weekend. Cruz was able to shut out Trump in Colorado's delegate wrangling on Saturday and lasso all 34 of the Centennial State's available delegates. Why? Well, until now, the outsider Trump has relied on a small campaign staff with few professional political operatives to carry out a shotgun strategy of big rallies, along with a shock and awe media campaign generated by Trump himself. But winning in politics is also about how you play the game, and Trump has been forced to get more strategic. He recently hired convention veteran Paul Manafort, and perhaps more tellingly, he skipped the Sunday morning interview circuit for the first time in 5 months. Still, at state and local party gatherings, Trump lost out to Cruz in Indiana, Nebraska, and 3 other states, picking whose delegates get sent to Cleveland. This could be a deciding factor at the convention if Trump fails to win on the first ballot, and delegates are then free to vote as they wish. In April and May, more than half of the delegates who will vote at the convention are determined in state and local delegate contests. But it's a war on 2 fronts. There will also be several important primary fights going on above the surface in New York, Pennsylvania, Indiana, New Jersey, and California, where almost 450 delegates will get doled out to the candidates in coming weeks. Looking to New York, Tuesday, Trump is predicted to win the GOP side handily, as he has been shown to perform well in bluer states and is currently polling above 50%. New York is also Trump's home state, and Cruz didn't do himself any favors, scolding New Yorkers for their New York values. But it most likely won't be a shutout, and the nomination race will continue to be tight. How come? Well, New York distributes votes proportionally, and winning a majority of the votes at the state level would garner just 14 delegates. To get all of the state's 95 delegates, a candidate also needs to beat a 50% threshold in every congressional district. In Republican districts upstate, Cruz could peel off votes, and Kasich could do the same in more upscale, educated Manhattan districts. Kasich, however, continues to struggle to convince folks of his viability. But Kasich did get some good news from a 50-state snapshot poll released by Morning Consult on Wednesday. Among the poll's 44,000 respondents, Kasich was the only Republican shown to be able to beat Hillary Clinton in a general election, that is, if one were held today. Kasich states are shown in red. By winning a large block of Midwestern states and winning every state where Trump and Cruz would also beat Clinton, Kasich would win the Electoral College easily, 304 to 234. Not surprisingly, given this year's wild ride, however, 20% of those polled were still undecided. So, Democrats especially, have you had the Hillary versus Bernie dinner table debate yet? Is she too Wall Street? Is he too pie in the sky? Which one could get things done? Who's more likely to win? Oh, and pass the quinoa, please. Well, today we offer a particularly articulate version of that dinner conversation. On April 9th, I moderated a 2-hour proxy debate between 3 Hillary and 3 Bernie supporters held at the Judson Memorial Church in Manhattan. Here's a condensed 15-minute version, beginning with a Socialist Alternative Party member of the Seattle City Council who played a pivotal role in the fight for the $15 minimum wage. She is Kshama Sawant, and she feels the burn.
Look at what's happening in the heartland of America. A democratic socialist has struck an echo with tens of millions of people really across the demographic spectrum, but especially among young people. And these are people who are looking for a clear alternative to corporate politics. They're hungry for something that's different from what's been on offer through the status quo. That is, a Democrat who represents Wall Street interests or a Republican representing Wall Street interests.
I spent a lot of time, I've reported on from almost every state in this country, and I think it's an illusion to think that the vast majority of Americans see things the way maybe the people in this room see things. There was a poll taken last year by Gallup, where they asked people, what sort of person would you absolutely not vote for? And I think it was 8% said they wouldn't vote for a woman, somewhere around 40% said they wouldn't vote for an atheist or a Muslim, and 50% said they wouldn't vote for a socialist.
Now, I see this political revolution happening all across the nation. The high school kid in Ely, Nevada, who I met, 18 years old, who was a Bernie precinct captain. The 60-year-old woman in Florida, lifelong Republican, who is crisscrossing the country to knock on doors for Bernie. The people who knocked on 4,400 doors in Kenosha, Wisconsin. One reason we won 71 out of 72 counties.
I think it's really important to keep in mind there has not been one negative ad run against Bernie Sanders. And sometimes I talk to Sanders supporters and they say, well, what could they say about him? He's so pure. What are they going to do, call him a socialist? For one thing, yes, I actually don't think that most people do know that he's a socialist. You would be surprised what people don't know.
I'm 27. People who are round about my age, roughly my generation, millennials, if you will, have had this experience. We came of political age after 1989. The time that we were most politically beginning to come into political consciousness was around the time of the financial crisis. People my age saw their families lose jobs, graduated college unable to get a job, graduated with an average of $35,000 of college debt. People are not afraid of communists taking their stuff. People are afraid of Wall Street taking their stuff.
In 1980, Bernie Sanders was an elector for the Socialist Workers' Party, a Trotskyist party. Their platform, their platform called for the elimination of the military budget and solidarity. The elimination of the military budget and solidarity with the revolutionary regime in Iran. It is my devout belief that this would be disastrous.
Michelle, there are people who say on the other side that as Sanders leads in these hypothetical electability matchup polls, that there are also things that he hasn't attacked Clinton on that the Republicans would start going crazy with. So do they not even out?
Well, the only reason I don't think, I think that's true. I think that I think Bernie Sanders has run an incredibly honorable, positive campaign. To me, the reason that they don't even out is that you all know what she's talking about, right? Is there anybody here who's not familiar with the impeachment scandal? Is there anybody here who's not familiar with Emailgate? These things have been hashed out kind of ad nauseum for months and months and months. There's no skeletons there. There's nothing there that kind of the country at large that's not already, in my opinion, baked into her approval ratings.
And when we look at what is happening in this country and throughout this world, we need someone with that passion, with that commitment, and the background and experience of having broken down barriers in so many areas, whether it is women's rights, civil rights, economics, her position on issues as immigration reform. All of these are important in terms of breaking down barriers so that more can enjoy a life of opportunity than just a few.
Michelle Alexander, who wrote The New Jim Crow, wrote, I will say, the nation's most popular ever article on why the Clintons do not deserve the black vote, citing the welfare reform policies passed during the Clinton administration for which she helped advocate, and which she reaffirmed as late as 2008 and has not repudiated in this election. This is policies that disproportionately hurt people, disproportionately people of color, and disproportionately women.
It's not true to describe Hillary Clinton as one of the two major advocates for welfare reform. I think to describe her as a major architect of a policy that she, by all accounts, went along with grudgingly is simply not true. Similarly, the crime bill, it seems bizarre to me to blame Hillary Clinton for the 1994 crime bill when she was First Lady and use that as an argument for Bernie Sanders, who voted for the crime bill.
We have defined the debate in this party. We have forced a moderate who voted for the Iraq War, opposed marriage equality, supports the death penalty, pockets huge sums from the economic elites who have robbed the people to try to be like us.
But as Hillary said in Harlem at the Apollo this week, we can't let the good be the enemy of the perfect. Now, I don't know that Senator Sanders is perfect. None of us are perfect. But when he talks about figuring out, in his opinion, it's health care for all. It's no cost to students for their tuition. That, to me, is too easy. It is not something that is obtainable in our country today.
If Hillary has been lauded for being the most politically savvy, the most practical, I don't think it's a practical position to aim for what you want by compromising it away before you enter power. This strikes me as distinctly unsavvy.
So the question is, yes, we should be pushed to do that. You know what I would like? Affordable housing for everybody in the 5 boroughs. I would like that. Can I just snap my fingers and make it happen? No.
And I completely disagree with this idea that was presented that, as an elected official, I can't just snap my fingers and make good things happen. No, what you do is have movements push their own candidates who will be undividedly loyal to the movement and will use their seat to fight for what we need to win.
The thing that seems to be sticking in the craw of so many callers to my show, even those who intend on voting for Hillary Clinton, is the question of by what standard of being a progressive Democrat and with what kind of judgment, even if her personal integrity is intact, would she give a series of 6-figure speeches to Goldman Sachs consistent with what she says her positions are on money and politics?
Bernie Sanders is very fortunate to have that kind of support. $27 average is phenomenal. But she doesn't have that. She has to go out and have the fundraisers. People show up. That's how it works. Wait a minute. It doesn't influence. As an elected official, if you have integrity, which I believe she does, it does not influence your vote.
But what seems naive and sort of belies a misunderstanding of politics on that side really seems silly to me, and I would like to be persuaded that it is not exactly as I'm interpreting it now, is that if you have a candidate who takes a lot of money from banks who expect something. And the problem of our last decade, our primary problem, has been a massive financial crisis caused by those banks, which were deregulated under Clinton, and allowed to create that crisis. The most pragmatic thing seems to me to put someone in power who has not taken their money and is interested in doing something about them.
I'm not saying this is a defense of the buck-raking industry, but it is true that kind of everybody who retires from public life goes out and gives a lot of high-dollar speeches, and that one reason that they pay a lot of money is, one reason is surely to buy influence, and one reason is to buy the perception of connectedness, right? I mean, when they give these six-figure amounts to Colin Powell to give these kind of speeches, which they do, it's not because they're trying to buy favors from Colin Powell right now. He doesn't have any to dispense, right? So it's a scummy industry, but it's not one. One of the things that's frustrating to me as somebody who is, like I said, ambivalently supporting Hillary Clinton, is that a lot of the criticism is legitimate, and I also think it is disproportionate compared to the criticism given to male politicians who do exactly the same thing.
And that is, what do any of you on either team think the role of gender is in this race, either how important it is to have a woman president, and Hillary Clinton, as that woman president, and to Michelle's point just now, has Hillary Clinton been judged by a different standard, consciously or unconsciously, by a lot of people because she's a woman? Sarah, I know you just wrote an article about this, so go ahead.
Yeah, Hillary Clinton is judged by a different standard often. There's a lot of sexism out there. It applies up and down the class scale. Sexism is real. Sexism applies to Hillary in the media. Sexism is terrible. And there is a part of me, and I think a part of a lot of women, that sees the sexism Hillary has survived in the media over many years and says, man, you are a warrior. I have so much respect for that. So why then do I think that the best vote for women is for Bernie Sanders, the man? Bernie Sanders is a better candidate for women because he is the more redistributive candidate. More women head households that are in poverty. More women have tipped jobs. Women struggle to support families in this country, and if you talk to the nurses union, for example, they will say the thing that would make a difference to us is higher wages. It would be single-payer universal health care. The things they've been fighting for forever, and this is a vastly majority female union, right? Those things are better represented by Bernie Sanders. So the question is, do you want a symbolic victory for women, or do you want a real victory for most women?
I don't think that's the question for a couple of reasons. One is Hillary Clinton's record at the State Department. I mean, if you talk to people who work in development at the State Department, they will talk about how having someone who prioritizes issues of gender in all of the programs in development. For example, farm aid used to go primarily to men. There was just kind of an assumption that if you're, dealing with agricultural aid, you're dealing with men, even though it turns out that most of the agricultural labor that's not what we're talking about, but you can shout out some more things too. So there was, most of the agricultural labor in sub-Saharan Africa is done by women, and when you have somebody who recognizes the importance of gender, it ends up kind of affecting policy up and down the scale. Hillary Clinton has prioritized in a way that Bernie Sanders supports but has not made the center of his agenda: paid leave, equal pay, and reliable scheduling.
It is tough to be a woman in politics. And I also want to say the press, with all due respect to our wonderful moderator today, I don't think Hillary likes the press, and I don't think the press likes her.
Manhattan Borough President Gail Brewer ending those excerpts from the Bernie versus Hillary proxy debate held in New York on April 9th. The full debate is posted at therealnews.com. Yes, time for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. In addition to riding the subway and eating hot dogs at the original Nathan's in Brooklyn, the presidential contenders have been campaigning in upstate New York in places that look like this. These scenic landscapes also remind us of an important election issue: fracking. The rural border along the southern tier of New York is the one place where the natural gas revolution in America has come to a grumbling halt. Late in 2014, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo banned fracking. This came after nearly a decade of growing use of this form of energy extraction, which is now used in 22 states. Fracking has been praised for job growth, energy independence, and producing cleaner fossil fuels, also reducing energy costs. Critics counter that it contaminates water, pollutes the air, and adds to climate change. The issue has bubbled up in the Democratic race.
Do Washington politicians side with polluters over families? They sure do, because big oil pumps millions into their campaigns. Bernie Sanders is the only candidate for president who opposes fracking everywhere. Why? Because fracking pumps dangerous, cancer-causing chemicals into the ground and threatens our drinking water. Bernie, he can't be bought by them because he's funded by you.
I'm Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message.
So is the danger of fracking exaggerated in that ad? And was New York's Governor Cuomo right when he said he banned fracking based on the science? Let's talk science. Dr. Anthony Ingraffia is a professor of civil and environmental engineering at Cornell University. He's known for his studies of methane leakage from fracking wells, including an early paper which has been cited more than 700 times in the academic literature. He joins us on Skype from Ithaca, New York. Hello, welcome to our program.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me on today.
So you're well known for this finding, often disputed, that over the life cycle of a well, so much methane is released that fracking isn't the climate solution that it's made out to be. Some of this research is 5 years old. How's it holding up?
It's holding up very well. The vast majority of the peer-reviewed science that's been published since our paper in 2011 indicate that our estimate of the amount of methane released from shale gas development was conservative. There's actually more being released than we thought.
You know, the Obama EPA came to a different conclusion. Theirs was that methane, compared to going for coal or oil, produces much fewer carbon emissions.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of what we would call policy-based science. If you establish a policy early in your presidential regime, as indicated when Obama gave his State of the Union addresses way back when, and say that natural gas is a panacea and it's going to create jobs, make us energy independent, energy secure, and last for over 100 years, it's kind of hard in the face of those statements up front to read the science which says you were wrong.
Share some of your data with us.
Right after our 2011 paper, then Secretary of Energy Chu publicly said that our work was non-credible. And yet here we are 4 or 5 years later, and there's report after report after report coming out of the White House saying, gee, methane is really important. We better pay attention to it.
Give us some of your data on how pervasive the problem is. Is it everywhere where fracking takes place, or I've read that it might only be very site-specific, and so it's hard to figure out the total load?
Let me just say one more thing about fracking. Fracking is not the issue. I'm sorry that word ever came into the public lexicon. The issue is not fracking. The issue is shale. Yes, you have to frack to get gas and oil out of shale, but none of us would be having this conversation if it weren't for the fact that only recently the oil and gas industry figured out how to get oil and gas out of shale formations. So in answer to your question, we don't yet know how much effort it would take, how long it would take, or how much it would cost to find and fix all the sources of unintentional leakage and intentional venting of methane from shale gas and shale oil development. There's recent papers, as recently as last week, that surveyed over 8,000 shale gas and shale oil sites and found what everybody already knows. It's a statistical distribution of events. You have many cases where nothing happens, and you have few cases where a lot of methane is released. The problem now is on a national scale, and I would argue on an international scale, because climate change isn't just the US, it's climate change, fossil fuels in the world. You have to go over the world to millions of locations where potentially you have purposeful leakage or unintentional leakage, find the places where the leakage is the greatest, and then somehow force the industry to fix it at a time when they don't have money to do the job. Doesn't make any sense to me.
Another mystery has been the health implications of methane in drinking water as a result of the fracking through shale for natural gas. How much evidence is there that this is a problem, and how widespread a problem?
When Pennsylvania opened the door to shale gas development in 2007, there were 6 peer-reviewed papers in the entire literature referring to potential impacts to health of shale gas development. When Governor Cuomo made his decision in late 2014, there were over 150 papers. Currently, there are over 700 peer-reviewed papers, and the vast majority of those papers, at least 70% of those papers, conclude that shale gas development has bad effects on air quality, water quantity, seismicity, radioactivity, and human health. So it's not a matter of just methane getting into your water and you're being able to light your tap water on fire. Methane is not a medical issue. It's what comes along with the methane and what the methane does on the way getting into your water from a gas well, creating other harmful chemical compounds that do have a negative impact on human health that are the issue. And that issue is being studied very deeply across the country right now. And the preliminary peer-reviewed evidence is that this is not a good thing to be doing to people's drinking water.
Well, America will be watching for additional peer-reviewed evidence. Thank you for sharing yours.
Yes, thank you very much.
And that's POTUS 2016 for today. We're here each week at this hour. New York votes on Tuesday. We'll have results and pour some more cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.